10 Creepy Unsolved Rest Stop Mysteries. When you're traveling on a long road trip, a rest stop can provide a much-needed break and an opportunity to recharge your batteries. Unfortunately, because they are often situated in isolated locations where help is many miles away, rest areas are not always the safest places in the world. Here are some creepy, harrowing stories that have taken place at rest stops, many of which involve travelers becoming the victims of an unsolved mystery. 10. The Blind River Rest Stop Murders. In 1991, Gord and Jackie McAllister, an elderly couple from Lindsay, Ontario, decided to go on a road trip in their motorhome, eventually stopping to spend the night at a remote rest stop near the town of Blind River. Shortly after midnight on June 28, the couple was awakened by a knock on their door by an unidentified man claiming to be with the police. When the door was opened, a long-haired man burst inside, wielding a .22 caliber rifle and 20-gauge shotgun, demanding that the McAllisters hand over their valuables. After they complied with his demands, the assailant opened fire. Jackie was killed instantly, but the wounded Gord managed to flee the motorhome. Gord hid underneath the motorhome for cover, but before the killer could find him, another car pulled into the rest stop. It was driven by a 29-year-old man named Brian Major, who was immediately shot to death. Afterward, the gunman jumped into a van and fled the scene. Gord was able to make it to the road and flag down a passing truck for help, and he eventually provided police with a detailed description of the suspect. The case remained cold until 1999, when DNA technology linked a former police officer named Ronald Glenn West with the unsolved murders of 2 Toronto women in 1970. There is some suspicion that West might also have been responsible for the murders of Jackie McAllister and Brian Major, since he lived near Blind River at the time, and West's wife once remarked that the composite sketch of the suspect resembled her husband in a wig. However, the currently incarcerated West has never been conclusively linked to the Blind River Rest Stop murders, which remain unsolved. 9. The murder of Jane Snow. On May 15, 1979, 31-year-old nurse Jane Snow left her home in Grand Rapids, Michigan, along with her 2 young sons, aged 8 and 9. That evening, Jane was driving northbound on Interstate 75 when she decided to pull over at the Loon Lake Rest area, just outside of Gaylord. Jane headed for the ladies' room while her sons used the men's room. When Jane did not exit the ladies' room, her sons decided to check inside. They were horrified to find their mother's murdered body on the floor. She had been stabbed 23 times. The boys were able to flag down a passing motorist for help, but at no point did they see their mother's killer. Around the same time, a state trooper was driving southbound on Interstate 75 and picked up a hitchhiker less than 1 kilometer, (0.5 miles), from the rest area. The trooper noticed some scratches on the man's hands, but he was unaware that a murder had occurred nearby. He soon dropped the hitchhiker off but took his name and address. The suspect's name was John Mgalli, and he had an outstanding warrant for a bad check charge in Rhode Island. Mgalli was eventually picked up and questioned about Jane Snow's murder. That night, he had been at a bar in nearby Indian River and had left in a rage after a fight with his wife. When Mgalli was tracked down by police, he was wearing a shirt with bloodstains on it, but subsequent tests determined that the blood did not belong to Jane. Ultimately, there was not enough evidence to charge Mgalli with the murder, which continues to remain unsolved after more than 35 years. 8. The disappearances of Shayna and Shasha Henson. Shasha and her older sister, Shayna Kirkpatrick, departed with their mother, Kimula Henson, from their family's residence in Portland, Oregon on April 4, 2001. They planned to travel to British Columbia, Canada with Kimula's friend, Christina Meyer, and a man Meyer introduced as her husband, Curtis. Stephen Kirkpatrick, the girl's father and Kimula's boyfriend, told authorities that he and Kimula never met Curtis prior to April 2001. Meyer's husband was actually Frank Ehering, who was a fugitive from Missouri. Photos of Kimula, Meyer and Ehering are posted below this case summary. Ehering was wanted after allegedly attempting to murder his former wife. Ehering reportedly led a group of Satanists in Missouri and Meyer was allegedly a member. It has been established that Kimula and her daughters spent the night of April 5 at the Shasta Lodge in Redding, California with Meyer and Ehering. They apparently stopped in Sacramento, California during the day to allow Camila to pick up her birth certificate. It is believed that Meyer and Herring may have convinced her she needed the document to enter Canada. There has been no sign of the children since that time. Herring and Meyer were discovered at a rest area in Collier County, Florida on April 20, 2001. Meyer had been killed by a gunshot wound to the temple. Herring was seriously wounded from a gunshot wound to the head. He died in a hospital shortly thereafter. Authorities determined that Herring shot himself and his girlfriend in a murder-suicide. Herring left behind letters detailing the couple's plan to steal Camila's birth certificate. Meyer had assumed Camila's identity in Las Vegas, Nevada shortly after they met Camila and her children in Oregon. Camila's remains were discovered near Nixon, Nevada on April 28, 2001. She had been beaten in the head and shot to death. Authorities believe Herring and Meyer were responsible for her murder. An extensive search of the area produced no clues as to the whereabouts of Camila's daughters. Testing was done on a blood-stained hatchet found in Meyer and Herring's car. The blood was identified as Camila's. Neither Shasha nor Shayna's blood was present. Authorities believe that Meyer and Herring traveled to Florida alone during April 2001. Motel receipts indicate that the girls were not accompanying them at the time. Shayna and Shasha's car seats have never been recovered and their birth certificates are missing. Authorities do not know if Meyer and Herring harmed the children or sold them to other individuals. Shayna and Shasha's cases remain unsolved. 7. The Wright City Rest Area torso. A decade before her disappearance ever became a mystery to police, it was a body, decapitated, dismembered and dumped at a Wright City rest stop, that flummoxed investigators. Deanna Denise Howland was a Belleville native whose troubles started early on. By her 30s, Howland was hanging out around the Metro East, prostituting herself, using drugs and detached from her relatives. Police say that may be why the 35-year-old Alton woman wasn't reported missing when she vanished sometime in 2004. On Tuesday, investigators announced that recent DNA tests had linked the two cases on opposite sides of the river. The headless, limbless torso found in 2004 at a rest stop along Interstate 70 belonged to Howland. "This has been haunting me for the last 12 years, said former Warren County Coroner Roger Mozzie, now the county's presiding commissioner. "It's the only body I've never been able to identify and it's cost me a lot of sleep. There's nothing more frustrating than having someone under your care that you don't know who it is." The woman's torso was found at the rest stop on June 28, 2004. She was found down a small hill in a remote part of the rest stop, along a circle drive that was primarily used as a picnic area. Because the remains had not decomposed, police believe she had not been dead for long, perhaps for only hours, when she was discovered. Investigators believe she was killed somewhere else and dumped out of a vehicle. She was wearing only a black bra. Her identity remained a mystery. Among the only clues were scars from an appendectomy and a cesarean section. Investigators checked missing person reports, but found no match. Howland hadn't been reported missing yet. Police at one point interviewed a suspected serial killer who was being held by authorities in Alabama. Later, they said they believed a spouse or boyfriend might be responsible for the death. Police found a knife in a storm sewer that they said might have been used to dismember the body. But without a name for the victim, the investigation apparently went nowhere. Eventually the case went cold. Howland was married more than once and went by different names. Police said her maiden name was Deanna Barker. She also went by Deanna Kinnear and Deanna Froelich. Court records say she was born in Belleville, married in 1991 and divorced 4 years later. She had at least 2 children. Family members of Howland couldn't be reached or didn't want to talk. Records show about 24 criminal cases in Madison County beginning in 1996, including drug and paraphernalia possession, prostitution and solicitation. The last criminal charge listed in Madison County court records was a March 2004 charge of a pedestrian walking on the highway. Ferguson Captain Dan DeCarly, commander of the major case squad of Greater Street, Louis, said Howland lived a very transient lifestyle and was estranged from her family. She was known to hang out in Granite City and East Street. Louis, in addition to the Alton area, she wasn't reported missing until last year. Authorities said it's not clear what triggered that report at that time. Information about her was posted in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database, which said she was last seen in the Alton area on May 11, 2004. Meanwhile, in 2014, Warren County Sheriff's Lieutenant Matt Schmutz had reopened the torso case. At some point, investigators in Madison County got information that caused them to contact Warren County about a possible link between Howland's missing person case and the unidentified torso. It's not clear what that information was, and authorities declined to discuss specifics. After sharing information, authorities compared DNA from the torso to samples from some of Howland's relatives. Warren County Sheriff Kevin Harrison said his department received test results March 10 confirming the torso was Howland. The identification resulted from two investigators getting together, sharing what probably seemed like nothing, and it absolutely was the right information, Harrison said. Now, police hope they may finally be able to solve the mystery of how she died and who dumped her remains in Warren County. We want to focus on who she is and where she had been, Major Jeff O'Connor of the Major Case Squad said Tuesday as the DNA results were announced. We are looking for anything. I am sure somebody out there has some information about this. Or somebody. 6. The murder of Dexter Stefannek. In the fall of 1985, 67-year-old widower Dexter Stefannek left his home in Wisconsin and traveled to Corbett, Oregon, for an extended stay with his son's family. On November 18, Dexter decided that he wanted to return home and left his son's residence for the lengthy drive back to Wisconsin. The following morning, Dexter's abandoned vehicle was found in the Bad Root Rest area, located approximately 34 kilometers, 21 miles, outside Glendive, Montana. The car had been doused with gasoline and set on fire, but there was no sign of Dexter anywhere. 4 months later, Dexter's body was found in a remote dumping area 27 kilometers, 17 miles, away. He had been beaten and shot twice in back of the head. Investigators determined that Dexter probably stopped at the Bad Root Rest area when he crossed paths with his killer. Approximately 2 hours before Dexter's burning car was found, the rest area's custodian arrived at the location. The only vehicle in the parking lot was a Chevrolet pickup truck, but there was no one around. Shortly thereafter, as the custodian was leaving, he noticed Dexter's car pulling into the lot. It was driven by an unidentified man, who climbed out carrying 2 cans of gasoline. This man likely torched Dexter's vehicle before driving away in the pickup truck. Another puzzling aspect of this case is the fact that Dexter's suitcase was found at the landfill alongside his body. Money was still inside the suitcase, but Dexter's clothing was strewn everywhere, and the condition of the clothing seemed to indicate that it wasn't planted there until months after the murder. To this day, no one knows the identity of the mysterious man who murdered Dexter Stefannek or what his motive could have been. 5. The disappearance of Lee Cutler. Lee Cutler, an intelligent and good-hearted high school senior who loves hanging with his friends, is similar to most American teenagers, who do not always call mom with updates on his whereabouts. On the morning of October 20, 2007, Beth Frazen, Lee's mother, is thinking the same thing. Lee had been at a sleepover the night before and was headed to work at noon at a new job at the mall. Calling mom had probably slipped his mind. However, as the morning passes into afternoon without any call from Lee, Beth grows anxious. After all, she told him to call. Beth repeatedly calls Lee's cell phone only to listen to his voicemail message on the other line. A concerned mother, Beth decides to drive to the mall, yet is startled to find Lee has not shown up for work. Lee's new boss is nonplussed by Lee's absence, offering that perhaps Lee misunderstood the schedule and thought the shift started at 5 o'clock, instead of noon. He is probably still with his friends, she reasons. Beth returns home, waiting for what she describes as the longest hours of her life until the clock struck 5. For a small group of friends from Adlai Stevenson High School, the previous night was like any other. Lee gathered with family and friends for a birthday party at a favorite hibachi steakhouse. As the party entered the cool fall air, Lee gathered with some friends for an impromptu game of hacky sack as his mother, Beth Frazen, slipped into her car and drove home. Lee soon followed, and arriving home, he walked into his mother's room and asked if he could stay over at a friend's house. Beth said of course, yet repeatedly asked him to call in the morning. Lee had a good heart, but his past reveals the darker pain of someone blessed by a heart that welcomes too many in. He was a habitual problem solver and negotiator, trying to mend fights between his mother and stepfather, often dealing with topics that many teenagers would rather ignore. He has a history of internalizing the pain and misfortunes of others. During his freshman year at Adlai Stevenson, Lee was involved deeply with a girl in her senior year. When the relationship ended, Lee became distraught and at one point, brought a knife to school. At 3:45 on October 21, nearly 11 hours after the clock struck 5 at Beth Frazen's house, police find Lee's gray 2007 Toyota Corolla 177 miles away in Baraboo. The next morning, after watching the car all evening with no sign of Lee, the officers begin investigating the vehicle and the surrounding area. Inside, they find a copy of Into the Wild and a note, addressed to his mother: "My head is too big for my body. Finally I'll get to sleep. I'm sorry Mom for being a coward. I love you Mom. Please be happy." In the years after Lee's tough breakup, Beth helped guide Lee through the difficult process of psychiatric treatment, and soon enough, the Lee his friends knew before, returned. He was the charismatic leader of the B'nai B'rith youth group. As troubles mounted at home, Lee became more involved in his Jewish faith. He spoke to his cousin, who was a free spirit like Lee, and had served in the Israeli army. For a young man trapped with a difficult stepfather, and mounting emotions from relationships with girls, the chance to escape and serve a cause may have appealed to him. As the sun rises in the state park in Baraboo, police begin finding Lee's possessions in the nearby woods: his yarmulke, his pants and love letters from his most recent girlfriend, Autumn. A few days later his wallet is found caught in a branch in the river and empty bottle of Tylenol PM near his car. Recently, he had been using the drug to help him go to sleep. Taking a clue from the found copy of Into the Wild, a true story about a young man leaving life and living in the Alaskan wilderness, state police and investigators comb the area. Helicopters and heat-sensing computer technology cover every possible area Lee, an amateur hiker, would have covered. Clued in by the note to his mother, teams of divers are bestowed a more grim task: combing the shallow river near the spot where investigators had found Lee's possessions. The result is bittersweet. Both squads find nothing. Investigators conclude that Lee has disappeared. While many signs point to suicide, investigators remain certain that if Lee killed himself or is dead, he is nowhere near the state park where his car was found. If Lee were in the park, alive or dead, he would have been found. In such a mysterious case, almost everybody has a theory. Was it possible for Lee to flee the country to join the Israeli army with the help of his free-spirited cousin? Did he meet a girl online and run away, staging his own death? Recently Beth has heard that Lee was spotted in a homeless shelter in California, and other witnesses claim to have seen Lee on the streets of New York and Las Vegas. Every time, Beth sends a flyer to local authorities, and every time, the lead turns up false. Beth has her own theory. Wherever Lee is, he is personally happy. In the note found in his car, he said, "He wanted me to be happy, but you know what? I'm not happy. I want Lee to come back." 4. The murder of Xavier Balligan. In the summer of 2011, Xavier Balligan, a 29-year-old divorced father from Pontoise, Belgium, took his 2 young children on a camping trip in the Rhône-Alpes region of France. At approximately 2:00 a.m. on July 19, Xavier and his children were traveling home when he decided to pull over at the Malvax rest area in the French Alps. Xavier went to use the restroom while his sleeping children remained in the vehicle. Shortly thereafter, an employee from a motorway operating company heard some gunshots as he passed by. He investigated the rest area and found Xavier's body in front of one of the toilets. He had been shot 4 times, but the killer was nowhere to be found. At the time of the murder, there were several truck drivers parked at a rest area on the other side the motorway. They were questioned and tested for gunshot residue on their hands, but all of them came up negative. Xavier had injuries on his hands, which indicated a struggle with his killer before his death. There were numerous theories about Xavier's murder, including that he was the victim of a contract killing or of a random, failed carjacking. 1 year later, a British tourist named Saad Al-Hili was ambushed and shot to death in his car on a remote road in the French Alps. Saad's wife and mother-in-law were also killed, but the 2 Al-Hili children survived the attack. Since the shootings occurred less than 160 kilometers, 100 miles, from each other, This led to speculation that both murders were committed by a tourist-hating serial killer. However, no definitive connection has ever been found between the two crimes, which are both still unsolved. 3. The Willow Patch rest stop suicide. On the morning of January 25, 1984, a 1968 Chevrolet Bel Air was found at the Willow Patch rest stop in White Pine County, Nevada. The decomposing body of a white male estimated to be in his 40s was in the front seat. The obvious cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning, as a rubber hose had been connected to the vehicle's exhaust pipe and ran through the passenger side window. The deceased victim carried no identification, but there was a suicide note which appeared to be written in the form of a prayer and was signed J. He also had $201.40 in his wallet, and the note requested that the money be donated to the Mormon Church. It appeared that the man had made a deliberate attempt to conceal his identity. Even though a lot of clothing was found in the vehicle, all of the tags had been removed. The car's license plate was missing, but there was a vehicle identification number, van. However, all attempts to use the van to uncover any record of the Bel Air came up empty. The car's back seat was also missing, which seemed to indicate that the man had been living in the vehicle. The most unique piece of evidence was a homemade electric component box in the glove compartment. It had leads connected to the starter and was most likely a timing device used to automatically turn off the vehicle. Even though investigators had plenty of clues to go on, they have never been able to find out anything about Jay or his decision to take his own life. 2. The disappearance of David Lovely. In the summer of 1985, Jackie Abbott was planning to make a cross-country move from California to Massachusetts. She would be accompanied by her 19-year-old son, David Lovely, and his 18-year-old sister, Allison. The family loaded all of their belongings into a moving truck, but David wanted to make the entire journey on his motorcycle. While his mother and sister traveled in the truck, David followed closely behind them. Things went smoothly until they stopped in Evanston, Wyoming. On August 5, David told his family that he needed to get some repairs done on his motorcycle but agreed to meet them at a nearby rest area. When Jackie and Allison arrived at the rest area later that day, David was not there. Even after they spent the entire night at the location, David never showed up. The family soon learned that David's aunt received a phone call from him. According to David, his motorcycle had broken down, so he pushed it to a truck stop in Fort Bridger and encountered a rough-looking man on a Harley-Davidson. Even though David was initially afraid of him, the man actually wound up fixing the motorcycle, so David planned to rejoin his family. This would be the last anyone ever heard from him. 9 days later, David's motorcycle was found on an isolated dirt road. The keys were in the ignition, the tank was half full, and the motorcycle appeared to be in good condition. David's knapsack and books were also found on the ground beside it. Other than the phone call to his aunt, there have been no confirmed sightings of David Lovely after he separated from his family, and he remains missing 30 years later. 1. The murder of Father Reynaldo Rivera. On the evening of August 7, 1982, a Catholic priest, Father Reynaldo Rivera, received a phone call at the rectory of St. Francis Cathedral in Santa Fe. The caller said his name was Michael Carmelo and that he immediately required the services of a priest to administer last rites to a dying individual. Carmelo claimed that he was calling from a rest stop near the town of Waldo and that Father Rivera should meet him there. Rivera complied with the caller's request and left the rectory, but this would be the last time he was seen alive. 3 days later, Father Rivera's body was found on a remote road approximately 5 kilometers, 3 miles, from the rest stop. He had been shot to death. Rivera's car was later found at another rest stop near the town of Grants, and the vehicle was wiped clean of physical evidence. The only thing taken from Rivera was his last rites kit, and a check of the name Michael Carmelo came up empty. The motive for the crime is unknown, and it's unlikely that Father Rivera was specifically targeted, as it was only by complete chance that Rivera happened to answer the phone at the rectory that night. There is some speculation that Rivera's murder might be connected to the 1984 disappearance of another Catholic priest, Father John Kerrigan. Father Kerrigan went missing shortly after being transferred to Ronan, Montana, amid allegations of child sexual abuse. Even though Kerrigan's body was never recovered, his car was found abandoned, and there was a large amount of blood, indicating foul play. While no conclusive connection has been established between the two crimes, there are enough similarities to suggest that Father Rivera and Father Kerrigan might have been murdered by the same person.